All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanna Rolfe. I'm the floodplain mapping coordinator with the Kansas Division of Water Resources. And I'm going to hand this over to Keegan Short. She's our floodplain outreach specialist, and she's put together this new class. Hopefully you all enjoy it. It's definitely a topic that she's cares about a lot. And so we're excited for her to present this to you for the first time. And hopefully, if you have any feedback or anything like that, we welcome that and definitely encourage questions, discussions throughout the presentation. So I'll go ahead and go off mute and I will be monitoring the chat if anybody has questions or anything, but I'll go ahead and hand this over to Keegan.
Yeah, hi guys. So yeah, as Joanna said, this is uh this is a new class that I've put together. It differs a bit from some of the other stuff that at least we've put on while I've been here, but it's a topic I'm passionate about, so I hope I can deliver it well. Um the pre the uh topic of the presentation is the benefits of natural healthy floodplains and specifically natural healthy floodplains in Kansas. Um, Especially ways that we can mimic those conditions in areas where we don't necessarily have healthy floodplains anymore, or at least not room to restore them. Um, so there we go. My mouse gave me trouble. My name's Keegan Schwartz. Joanna mentioned I'm the floodplain outreach specialist at the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources. Um, My goals, not just with this presentation, but in general, is to help Kansans better understand native floodplains, streams and rivers, and riparian ecosystems. Um, I'd like to teach flood safety to both kids and adults, and share my passion for my home state with other Kansans, native born or otherwise. I've not lived here my whole life. I've kind of lived all over the country, but I've lived here the longest. I was born here. Um, and the prairie has a way of growing on you, even when I'm out by Vegas in this photo here by Red Rock National Canyon or up in the woods up north. I always love coming back here, and that's where I've settled down. So if anyone needs anything that they think I could help out with, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be more than happy to do what I can. All right, so some of the goals of this workshop are to learn about types of floodplain ecosystems, the like different varieties. So we have both forests and prairies here in Kansas. Generally, it's mostly prairie, but there is some variation. Uh, to learn about natural floodplains and the benefits that they have. Nature-based flood and erosion preventions is another goal. I'd like to discuss ways that we can help preserve floodplains, both as a community and on an individual scale. Uh, both I'd like to discuss both large-scale community efforts and smaller-scale individual efforts to practice nature-based flood and erosion management. And of the general examples we go over, I'd like to consider and potentially discuss what will work best in Kansas, and in various parts of Kansas, because this state does have quite a lot of variety in the types of biomes it has, mostly prairie, but we've got tall grass, short grass, and even some oak hickory forest up northeast. So floodplains are the generally flat areas adjacent to rivers and streams. Floodplains are prone to flooding and are often submerged by floodwaters. They are generally composed of fertile silt, sand, clay, and gravel deposited by flooding rivers. Historically, floodplains have been at the center of civilization due to the rich substrate deposited by floodwaters. Rivers like the Nile were valued for the fertility of its annual floods, but people remained wary of the dangers its floodwaters posed.
Keegan, I think you're either not speaking directly into the mic, it's kind of muffled.
Ah, is that any better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I adjusted my headset a bit. Um, floodplains historically have been at the center of civilization due to the rich substrate deposited. Um, that was a big thing. If you've ever just briefly studied like the meeting of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile River, anywhere where there's rivers, there's always been civilization because that flooding has always had a lot of benefit for the vegetation. Because of that fertile soil and the natural water there, we tend to see more rich vegetation growing alongside rivers naturally, even without humans there to plant stuff. Um, Many waterways in the US don't overflow to fill the entire floodplain the way they used to, thanks to human intervention in the forms of levees, stream dredging, channelization, etc. But the vegetated areas alongside rivers still have value today. Land management obviously has changed a lot uh, since the United States, uh, I guess, became the United States. We have made some decisions in the past that we might not have made today in terms of management. So all we can do now is a combination of uh, restoration, remedies, and working with what we have. We can benefit from preserving and restoring these natural floodways, as well as from mimicking their conditions on a smaller scale. So floodplains and riparian ecosystems. As I mentioned when we started, Kansas has several different floodplain dependent ecosystems specifically. Most of the forests in Kansas are riparian forests, forests that grow uh, along waterways. Wetland riparian areas. We do have a lot of valuable wetlands in Kansas. We've got the Baker Wetlands up northeast. Cheyenne Bottoms is a huge one. And playas out in western Kansas are another feature pretty characteristic of the prairie. Um, So riparian environments are the natural areas alongside bodies of water. Riverine ecosystems are associated specifically with rivers, and lacustrine, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, ecosystems are associated with lakes. Um, Riparian ecosystems have soil made up largely of nutrient-rich sediments and are very high in organic matter. The trees, bushes, forbs, and grasses growing in these areas are generally flood tolerant and better suited for growth in damp environments than other plants in the region. Because of these unique growing conditions, riparian environments often create small pocket ecosystems. Ecologically, the term is microsites, where unique flora and fauna can thrive. Um, in a lot of places in Kansas, you can head out to a hillside and see grass thriving on the top of the hill. Maybe if you're out in the Flint Hills, you can see spots where the rocky hilltops are populated mostly with short grasses. The sides of the hills can be populated with taller grasses. And then down in the valleys, you'll see trees, bushes. Um, Basically, uh, these little pocket ecosystems create areas where plants can thrive further. Generally, in Kansas, it's further west than usual. We have some forest species like uh, different types of wild rose. Jack in the pulpit is a big one. It's our country's native pitcher plant variety, and they will grow in these little pocket microsites, but not elsewhere. Riparian forests are the primary type of forest in Kansas. Most of the state is too dry to sustain large forests and very much too windy. So our state's native trees thrive alongside bodies of water and in the damp valleys between hills. These forests are also called gallery forests. Gallery forests form alongside water or wetlands, creating narrow corridors of trees and otherwise sparsely wooded regions. Aside from providing habitat for wildlife, these forests serve as windbreaks and erosion control over the surrounding area, especially in a lot of areas where our streamlines, like here on the Konza Prairie Nature Trail. I took this photo while I was out helping with a foray out there as a volunteer. The streams can almost dry up entirely in summer when it's warmer, but if we were to get torrential rainfall, there would be a lot of water hitting this area very quickly. Having that vegetation along the stream banks like that, the roots of the trees are almost like rebar in concrete, or if you stick a toothpick in your sandwich so it doesn't slide apart. They provide structure for the soil to cling to, which prevents erosion downstream and keeps this area nice and flat and ready to hold water rather than, a big dredged ditch. Wetland riparian areas. So a wetland, we're familiar with that. It's an area saturated with or submerged beneath still or relatively Sorry, I thought I heard someone speaking, but it was just my bad. Um, uh, a wetland is an area saturated with or submerged beneath still or relatively slow-moving water with enough frequency to support vegetation suited to amphibious or semi-aquatic conditions. Examples of wetlands include bogs, swamps, and marshes. A bog is a wetland that accumulates deposited vegetative material as peat. Bogs are typically acidic, anaerobic, and very high in tannins, which give the water a dark tea-like color. A swamp is a wooded wetland specifically that consists of standing water and soil and or soil that remains saturated water with water year round. Swamps can be freshwater, saltwater, or brackish, depending on the region. I'm going to go out on a limb and say we're probably not going to experience any saltwater ones in Kansas, but it's good to know about them either way. Marshes are generally populated by herbaceous plants as opposed to a swamp's woody plants. So things like grasses, leafy bushes, forbs. Swamps will probably be larger woody bushes, trees. Marshes are perpetually or frequently flooded by nearby sources of moving water. All of these types of wetlands can be found alongside rivers, dominating healthy and frequently inundated floodplains. Most of Kansas's wetlands are marshes or playas, but small swamps can be found in wooded parts of the state as well, particularly along the state's eastern border. Or further west in the state, you can find them in places alongside lakes, are generally artificial lakes, but oxbows can create marsh-like environments. Wooded areas with low-lying pits where the water can't evaporate as quickly, you can find small marshes, but those are pretty small and kind of an outlier. High plains playas. Playas are shallow depressions in the earth that collect water from rain and runoff and retain it, which allow the water to slowly evaporate or sink into the soil. Um, Playas retain water much longer than other environments common in Kansas, like the semi-arid shortgrass prairies and the farmland that dominate much of the western half of the state. Playas retain water much longer than other environments common in Kansas, such as the semi-arid shortgrass prairie and farmland that dominate much of the western half of the state. Playas provide important habitat for migrating waterfowl and native amphibians. Western Kansas doesn't have a whole lot of lakes exactly. So these small puddles are important pit stops basically for them to stop and rest and eat. Um, while not necessarily found exclusively within floodplains, playas are common within them and are beneficial in flood prevention and groundwater absorption, both in and out of the floodplain. Maintaining healthy floodplains has both flood loss reduction and wildlife conservation benefits. So in terms of loss reduction, we can have some better water retention and storage, flow regulation, and groundwater absorption. That's groundwater absorption is a big one out here just because groundwater is so important to a lot of our state's residents. Wildlife conservation, so it provides water quality improvement, habitat protection, and recreation opportunities. Things like fishing, waterfowl hunting. Um, I don't know if anyone is into like, collecting plants or mushrooms or bird watching, but all of that relies pretty heavily on having these healthy natural environments to partake in those activities in. So for water retention and storage, when water levels are high due to an extreme rainfall or snowmelt event upstream, streams and rivers can overflow. Floodplains provide a place for this water to go where it can be stored and slowly released back into the stream, absorbed into the ground, evaporated, or taken up by plants. Excess water entering streams results in exponentially higher water levels downstream, which can cause structure damage, injury, or even loss of life. If this water can even temporarily be withheld in floodplains upstream to be released slowly once the threat has passed, uh, damage can be significantly reduced downstream. So here's a quote from FEMA. 1 acre of floodplain flooded 1 foot deep holds approximately 330,000 gallons of water. Upstream floodplain storage can have significant impact on damage prevention downstream if enough land is set aside to be flooded during high water events. Flow regulation. So floodplains do regulate the flow of water into lakes and streams. Um, Floodplains, especially those polluted with native plants suited to their habitat, help to slow the rate of rainwater runoff reaching a watershed's main body, preventing excessive bank erosion, stream bed degradation or lowering, and sedimentation of downstream lakes, estuaries, and dams. Regulated flow of streams and rivers by floodplains reduces stress on reservoirs, dams, and levees. Groundwater absorption. Water retained in floodplains has time to slowly seep into the groundwater. Less water flowing directly into water bodies means less water contributing to annual flood peaks. Groundwater near water bodies slowly re-enters lakes and streams during dry spells and periods of low water. Withheld water that enters groundwater helps to recharge aquifers, which is especially important in places like Western Kansas, where we're beginning to experience some serious groundwater shortages. Um, so the groundwater absorption is not just important for replenishing our aquifers. It is also really important in just protecting the integrity of our water bodies. There are multiple times when in a region we get a serious storm, and the next day, sandbars, or not the next day, once the water level goes down, sandbars are gone. There's new debris thrown around. Habitat is significantly reduced. There's damage to property near the shore. It it when there's a ton of water entering a water body at once, it can cause more damage than a slower fill, obviously. Here is a map of percent change in aquifer thickness in Kansas high plain aquifers. Um, as you can see, there in central Kansas here, there are a few instances of uh, minimal degradation or even some recharge, also here in northwest Kansas, but it's really bad far southwest here. The water table is getting lower and lower. These aquifers don't recharge as quickly as the ones further north, further east. Um, Aquifer depletion is becoming a huge issue in much of western Kansas, and future predictions only show that getting worse. It is partially caused by groundwater overuse. More water is drawn up from the ground for agriculture and other purposes than can be absorbed back into it. But drought conditions are a huge contributor. We have less rain. Because it's so dry, farmers have no choice but to draw up more water for irrigation. And then that hard, dry soil creates faster runoff and poorer absorption. When the soil is packed hard, rainwater just tends to run off instead of sitting there and absorbing. Floodplain areas offer a place for water to slowly soak into the ground, which helps to recharge those aquifers. Water quality improvement. This is a big one, especially around wetlands. Uh, Many aquatic and amphibious plants that live in still or slow-moving water are great at cleaning their environment. A huge one is my background image here is cattails. Uh, Cattails are actually an edible plant. Their rhizomes, their tubers underground, are a starchy tuber, not much unlike a potato or a turnip, but they are generally considered unsafe to eat in most of the US because they are so good at sucking up toxins from their environment. They essentially make themselves poisonous because they are retaining heavy metals and pollutants. Um, that's just a fun fact there. Chemical pollutants and heavy metals present in water that is stored in floodplains have time to be filtered out by the plants living there. The vegetation present in the floodplain also acts as a physical filter for soil, sand, and silt that is washed downhill, downstream, preventing the bank from eroding into the water. Like again, that rebar in concrete metaphor, or I suppose simile. The decomposing organic matter retained by floodplain vegetation acts as a carbon sink, preventing excessive carbon dioxide from entering the water and atmosphere by capturing it in fertile soil that nurtures the next generation of floodplain vegetation. Carbon sinks are also useful in preventing algal blooms. Obviously, Large amounts of fertilizer runoff can be a huge contributing factor to big algal blooms, but high amounts of carbon dioxide in the water means plenty of carbon dioxide for plants to take up, which can result in those big algal blooms that we see occasionally. Shallow waters, wet mud, and sandbars in and around streams and rivers support native freshwater mussels, which are also incredible at filtering water. Um, we here in Kansas, or in most of the Midwest, most of the country, do have a serious problem with zebra mussels right now. And the one thing they're good at is filtering water, but they are out competing all of our native species, which are better at filtering water. So it's important to protect their habitat, places they can thrive, since they're being pushed out of other areas. Habitat protection. I've got a couple pictures of some wetland birds that can be found in Kansas, specifically bald eagles. We're seeing a lot of those lately. It's nice to see their population recovering. Floodplains provide a valuable habitat for native flora and fauna. Uh, Many native plant species, most adept at living alongside bodies of water, have difficulty surviving elsewhere. These native plants often have a symbiotic relationship with local fauna, either as habitat or a food source. If no floodplain is present for these plants to live in, significant biodiversity can be lost. The shallow water, seasonal ponds, and damp soil present in floodplains provide valuable shelter for young fish and small fish species. These habitats also provide a place for native fish and amphibians to spawn. Migratory birds and waterfowl rest, feed, and breed in floodplains and wetlands. These environments are imperative to their life cycle and the livelihood of many different species of birds. Um, Addressing that habitat for waterfowl, we have recreation opportunities. Tying into the previous slide, uh, uh, upland game bird hunting is really popular in Kansas. We generally have a pretty healthy population of game birds, though in recent years that has been struggling a bit. Um, the uh, the vegetation, the tall bushes and grasses that grow in floodplains are incredible habitat for ground nesting game birds like quail, pheasant, grouse, anything that nests on the ground and takes shelter in that brush. Um, and also, of course, waterfowl. It has a place for them to come and rest and for recreation opportunity as well to hunt those waterfowl. Healthy floodplains help foster better recreation opportunities such as fishing, hunting, hiking, camping, boating, trail biking, and more. Fishing and boating is more desirable in clean water surrounded by native vegetation with predictable water levels and thriving wildlife populations, including fish. Um, as mentioned in the previous slide here, the shallow water allows a place for young fish and small fish species to spawn. Uh, so young fish that you're fishing for, those are species that have a chance to spawn in that shallow water. Of course, we do stock our waterways in most of the places in Kansas where fishing is allowed, but those small fish species are also a good source of fish for those, or a good source of food for those sport fish and even edible fish. Uh, get fatter fish, healthier fish, more of them. Since dry land directly bordering water bodies often can't be used by humans for much else, they serve as a perfect place for recreation activities like hiking, biking, camping, and wildlife spotting. Things like bird watching, those bald eagle populations that are looking good. Um, Riversides, floodplains are a great place to spot those. Uh, the tall grass and reeds, woody brush, and forbs that thrive in floodplains serve as valuable habitat to native ground nesting game birds. Quail, pheasant, prairie chickens, and turkeys all benefit from the habitat and foraging opportunities present in vegetated floodplains. All right, so I mentioned that already. I forgot that I had a bullet point for that, but it's important. It's farmland does not offer a very good place for these animals to hide, especially after harvest. So having areas of habitat where they can live aside from areas that we farm it's good for them. Erratic weather patterns and natural protections. Kansas is obviously no stranger to erratic weather patterns. This is probably a pretty um, applicable time to mention that, considering the storms yesterday and the nasty hail. Uh, we've had especially severe weather events in recent years. Um, Between hot, dry summers, brutal winter conditions, and long periods of drought punctuated by major storms, preserving and restoring our floodplains may be one way to soften the blow to communities, especially as it seems our weather is just getting more severe. Drought conditions followed by heavy rain, drought conditions followed by heavy rain results in increased flooding. This is because dry, hard soil absorbs far less water and results in more ponding and runoff. Water bodies, damp soil, and plants reduce the air temperature. Oh, hold on, I'm reading this out of order. Uh, Erratic winter temperatures can damage vegetation and wildlife by putting them through rapid freeze-thaw cycles and disrupting their life cycles. This puts further stress on stressed habitats, places like wetlands that are threatened by pollution, by sedimentation, by nearby construction, anything that anything that stresses a plant can make other stressors worse. It's just like a human. If you have bad allergies and a cold, two things at once is going to be bad for you. If you have a pine tree that has nematodes and now it's a dry year, then the pine tree might die. It's same thing with our floodplains. Um, Hot summers bake the ground, especially in urban areas, and the stored heat doesn't entirely dissipate at night. This results in what is called the urban heat island effect, which can create temperatures up to 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher in urban areas than their surroundings. If any of you have ever stepped out of your car into a parking lot in summer, um, I'm sure you do not need this urban heating island effect explained to you. If you've had the difference of walking even with shoes in grass versus on a blacktop, it's you can feel the difference. Um, Water bodies, damp soil, and plants reduce the air temperature by evaporating water into the air, reducing air temperature in urban areas. Plants like tall grasses and trees also shade the ground significantly more than turf grass. Um, there is there's someone who's working on restoration of prairie in a lot of Kentucky, and he is sharing his progress as he goes. And he did a study where he measured the ground in turf grass lawns in parks and medians and roads that were just filled with lawns, mowed grass. And the ground temperature was pretty significantly higher there than in areas shaded just by tall grass, maybe a foot or two high. So things like road medians, empty lots even that are waiting to be developed, having these small areas that are allowed to be populated with tall grasses can significantly reduce that urban heat island effect. Uh, Wetlands and floodways provide a place for runoff to be retained, reducing downstream flooding. The roots of plants in vegetated floodplains create channels for water to sink into the soil instead of continuing downstream. That's also a benefit that some people have mentioned in some low-till gardening and farming practices. Those root channels from previous plants allow water to get down into the soil. Um, and it also allows for air to get down in the soil. The healthier vegetation present in natural floodplains is more resilient against environmental stressors and provides a place for wildlife to take shelter against the elements. Um, that's pretty, it speaks for itself. I mean, there's habitat benefits in general just for having green spaces available. So now we get into what can we do. So there are several ways that we as a community and as individuals can reap similar benefits to healthy floodplains on a smaller scale. Um, we obviously we can't snap our fingers and have floodplains that have been developed, woods that have been cut down, come back, but there are plenty of ways that we can practice conservation and develop nature-based flood mitigation solutions in developed areas on a small scale and reap those benefits. All right. So in our communities, uh, the ways that we can practice this sort of conservation mimicking natural floodplains. Native plants are a huge one, one that I feel like a lot of Kansans can get behind, especially things like milkweed, seeing our monarch population kind of still struggling, but I feel like I've seen a few more in recent years than maybe 10 years ago. Replacing invasive and non-native ornamental plants in gardens, landscaping, and public green spaces with native species benefits the soil, water, wildlife, and more. Permeable paving surfaces in areas that, don't need, uh, don't require a good, sturdy, hard concrete or asphalt blacktop, somewhere like a parking lot in a park or a recreation area, a basketball court, a tennis court. um, Permeable pavement and ground cover that can be easily penetrated by rainwater is more environmentally friendly than solid pavement or shallow rooted non-native turf grass. And the last one is wilderness corridors and wild hedgerows. A wilderness corridor is a section of undeveloped land which connects green spaces through developed areas, which acts like a bridge for wildlife to cross. Um, in north central Kansas and in just central Kansas, I've noticed a lot of orioles in areas alongside rivers, and very few of them outside those areas. Orioles are just one species that kind of doesn't like venturing out into urban areas and can really benefit from those corridors to pass through. And that's just one example. All right, so native plants. Um, This photo is of some compass plant I took the picture of at the Tallgrass Prairie Nature Preserve, and a little sketch of the plant up close that I drew for a different project. The deep roots of native tall grasses, short grasses, and forbs help to aerate compacted soil. Big blue stem has 10-foot deep roots. Compass plant has 15-foot deep roots. Buffalo grass, which is a short grass, which I had a lawn made of buffalo grass, has dense 8-foot deep roots. And switchgrass has 10-foot deep roots, and it is flood and drought tolerant. The deep channels dug by the root systems also serve as habitat for soil-dwelling fauna and provide channels for rainwater to soak into the ground. These deep-rooted plants also prevent soil erosion by providing a structure for the soil to cling to. Native Kansas prairie plants are naturally resistant to the temperature extremes, high winds, and extended periods of drought that are common in Kansas. Um, and native flowering plants provide food and habitat for native pollinators and birds as well that eat seeds. Um, Unlike many non-native ornamental plants, which may not be compatible with local insects, there are some situations where you can have tons of flowering plants in your yard, but they just aren't compatible with the insects in the area. So they don't have pollinators, and the insects, the potential pollinators don't have a food source. Here is a infographic of the root depth of some native flowering plants. Uh, we have prairie clover, pale purple coneflower, Missouri goldenrod, wild white indigo, heath aster, rosinweed, false boneset, lead plant amorpha, compass plant, which you saw in the last image, and cylindrical blazing star. Blazing star is incredible to me because it is such a small plant compared to things like rosinweed, goldenrod, compass plant, but its roots it can be up to 15 feet deep and fairly dense too. They're not necessarily so much a taproot like compass plant is. Um, this infographic, I took the data from the Natural Park Service Flint Hills Tall Grasses, but I did draw this infographic. So if any of you want access to this, you can reach out to me and I can send this to you. All right. So um, I'm going to need a little bit of audience participation here. Can anyone tell me what these three plants have in common, at least in the state of Kansas?
They're invasive.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you'll see these three, I chose some of the most obvious ones. You'll see these everywhere. These are all invasive species, and they are um, invasive species that absolutely flourish in these conditions in Kansas. So an invasive species is any organism not native to the ecosystem which it inhabits. In addition to being unable to support the native ecosystem, invasive species also risk outcompeting native species. They can present unique risks like increased fire hazard, decreased groundwater absorption, and poor erosion protection compared to native species. The fire hazard thing here, California has been seeing the consequences of that significantly with their eucalyptus trees just going up like a torch. Uh, in Kansas specifically, our ecosystem has changed dramatically since European colonization. Without seasonal bison grazing and regular controlled burns and wildfires, the state's native gallery forests have begun to encroach upon its prairies. Eastern red cedar, which is often referred to as an invasive species, is actually native to Kansas. It is native to Kansas forests, but and it is the state's only native evergreen. It has begun to behave like an invasive species, creeping into grasslands and risking crown fires where it's taken over woodland edges and hedgerows. They are very resinous trees. It can be very difficult to burn them in a controlled burn when they're bigger than a sapling, but once they die, they can go up like a torch. Um, Eastern red cedar are what we refer to in ecology terms as an invasive behaving native. Uh, you can see conditions like this with deer. There was the issue in Yellowstone of overgrazing from deer affecting the streamlines. Uh, any species can become an invasive behaving native if it's not kept in check by what used to balance it. And in the instance of deer, in the absence of um, their natural predators like wolves, mountain lions, and big healthy coyote populations, bears, uh, humans have to step in. We rely quite a bit on human hunting to keep our deer populations in check. If humans didn't hunt them, they're already everywhere. They would be even more everywhere. Here we have a list of some common plant species considered invasive in Kansas. We have some of the ones I pointed out here, Callery or Bradford pear, garlic mustard. Down here we have Amur honeysuckle or bush honeysuckle. That's what you'll see everywhere in tree lines with those red berries that linger pretty long into winter because not a lot of birds eat those. They're not a very good food source. So while some birds do to spread the seeds, they mostly just sit there. They're not very beneficial to the native flora. We have a lot of honeysuckles here. Autumn olive is, you won't find that super commonly, but I have found it. I found it in Manhattan. I found it up around Frankfurt, uh, just in some hedgerows where it volunteered itself. We don't have a ton of Russian olives here, but I've seen a couple. Multiflora rose is a huge one. That's basically become naturalized at this point. It grows in our forests quite a bit. Tree of heaven, that can pop up in people's yards. It looks almost like a black walnut at first, but it grows very quickly and it kind of looks like a firework. It's got a long, narrow stem and a big explosion of leaves, and they'll take over a lot. Permeable surfaces. So I mentioned these in that intro slide there to this section. Paving stones or a concrete lattice paired with ground cover panels, gravel, brick, or porous asphalt or pervious concrete are some options for permeable surfaces. Some of the benefits they have, ground cover plants between pavers have a cooling effect on the surrounding area, like that urban heat island effect I mentioned. Even though turf grass isn't as good as tall grass, it is still significantly better than bare dirt or pavement. Um, Permeability allows water to seep into the ground rather than becoming runoff or a big puddle, reducing downstream flash flooding and soil erosion. Groundwater absorption helps keep nearby water bodies from becoming too low during dry periods. When the groundwater in an area is healthy, when water's been absorbed into the soil, it essentially seeps back into those ponds during dry periods. Reduced puddling on surfaces reduces freeze thaw damage. I'm sure everyone has noticed after a bad winter, we often have big cracks in our pavement that wasn't there before. not allowing it to puddle there so long does help with that. And it gets rid of mosquito spawning grounds. Better water and oxygen penetration improves the health of street trees, which provide shade, air purification, and aesthetic value to communities. Wilderness corridors and hedgerows. So retaining wooded or tall grass populated hedgerows or tree lines on the edges of properties reduces flooding downstream by slowing the flow of passing runoff and allowing water a chance to seep into the soil. Tree cover cools the soil and slows evaporation during dry spells. A fully dry soil absorbs water poorly, which causes ponding, erosion, and increased runoff downstream, which we mentioned. Uh, Wilderness corridors provide varied habitat for local wildlife to thrive, even in developed areas. They also allow uninterrupted travel for migratory species. As I mentioned with orioles, in this image on the right, let's say a population of native songbirds lives in this central wooded section here. They would not be able to travel so easily to this northeast section or travel upstream because they don't move outside of that habitat area. And that can also lead to genetic bottlenecking in some species, which it reduces their genetic biodiversity. It increases the likelihood of what's the term? Recessive diseases. That's it in species as they basically are breeding with not quite their family, but basically their family. It's not good for their population. Stretches of wild growth like this allow wildlife to pass between those green spaces, which improves the health of those isolated ecosystems. All right, so nature-based flood mitigation development. We mentioned previously some of the ways that that we can mimic these healthy floodplain environments, just incorporated into our everyday surroundings. But this is specific development that mimics the conditions uh, of these floodplains for flood mitigation. So rain gardens is a big one. A rain garden is a depressed section of landscaping filled with rocks and flood tolerant plants, which are designed to catch and retain rainwater and runoff. And bioswales, similar to rain gardens, but with a bit of a difference. Bioswales are planted drainage areas with an indirect route and obstacles for water to pass through, slowing its rate of flow downstream. So the difference being rain gardens are designed to hold on to the water while it absorbs into the soil or evaporates. Bioswales just slow the water flowing through so it doesn't all enter a water body at once. This can reduce erosion and flash flooding pretty significantly. Here's some examples of some rain gardens. These are in Johnson County. They're from a website that was blogging about them, which will be linked in the sources at the end if you're interested in where I got a lot of this information. The common size for a rain garden is 7 by 10 feet. These shallow depressions catch rainwater and runoff, which prevent it from contributing to flooding downstream or ponding in the immediate area. The water is then slowly absorbed into the ground, evaporated, or taken up by plants in the garden. Excuse me. It's important not to place these too close to structures to avoid seepage into them. You wouldn't install a pond right next to your basement foundation, and these can, in rainy conditions, become essentially a temporary pond. Rain gardens may overflow, in which case it is important to account for potential overflow and direct it away from structures, just like you might attach one of those long hoses to the end of your downspout to direct it in the right way. You have to accommodate for this too. So if this starts to overflow, just be sure you know where the runoff is going to go so it doesn't cause a problem. Bioswales. Here is a big one. This is from Kansas City. I believe this is from the Missouri side. I'm not certain. But again, this blog linking this is attached to my sources at the end. So while rain gardens are designed to retain water, bioswales are designed to slow its movement and potentially reduce the total amount of water released downstream by allowing time for ground absorption and plant uptake. Bioswales can be incorporated into drainage ditches, roadside culverts, in landscaping between buildings and beside sidewalks, in parks, and in road medians. Anywhere runoff from roads, roofs, etc., can be directed, a bioswale can be utilized. If any of you have been on K-State campus, there are a couple of these there, and they're really beautiful. They just look like nice little gardens, and in rainy times, it looks like a little water feature, and then it dries up and it's a garden again. Okay, questions. So some of my questions for you guys would just be, have you used any methods in your communities similar to those we discussed? If not, would you be interested in doing so? Are there any measures your community has taken to restore and protect healthy floodplains or mimic their conditions that we haven't mentioned? And then this is an opportunity for additional questions or comments from you guys for me. All right. Um, if if it looks like no one has anything to add or any questions to ask, we can move on, but I'll give another chance in case.
I was just going to note that if anybody wants to use the chat for this thought, feel free to do so.
Yeah, that the typing in the chat is all right as well. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on, but if anyone thinks of anything, feel free to speak up or post something in the chat. The community rating system is the NFIP's voluntary program for recognizing and encouraging community floodplain management activities that exceed minimum NFIP standards. The community rating system allows its communities to pursue risk reduction practices exceeding the minimum NFIP standards and receive discounted flood insurance premiums for their residents in exchange. These discounts are calculated by a ranking system that allows communities to earn points to move up on a rank scale, which earns residents greater discounts as they participate in more activities. I have a couple of links here. I can send out the slides after, so you guys can click on these if you'd like to learn more about CRS. We have a comment from Ben Harris here. In Douglas County, they've participated in property buyouts, and that assists with restoring natural function. That's great. Yeah. There are a lot of lots that sit empty that aren't ideal for development that have potential to restore natural functions, but don't have necessarily financial incentive to landowners. So that's a good measure. I didn't mention that. I should mention that.
There's also a comment from Trisha Webb.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, you're interested in seeing if local communities would be interested in implementing bioswales. Okay, yeah. I have a couple of sources at the end of this where I got some information. I believe I also might still have a document from K-State about bioswales. It was a project some students did and published. I can see if I can dig that up and potentially attach it in the follow-up if you're interested. Let's see. Okay, nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions are methods of flood mitigation that rely on mimicking or preserving natural conditions. Many of the conservation projects mentioned earlier in the presentation can be considered nature-based solutions. KDA and Stantec have partnered to create a list of nature-based solutions valuable in Kansas, which can be found by clicking the link below. And it's on this little not quite lily pad bubble here. Here's just an example from a couple of those. This is the cover from our nature-based solutions final report, and then an example from our little ID cards booklet. There's a bunch of different compressed information sheets in that booklet, so that's another useful resource. In conclusion, excuse me. The benefits of conserving and reconstructing natural floodplain areas are significant, but not all areas are suited for floodplain restoration. In these cases, we have options for development that mimic the conditions of natural vegetated floodplains, which includes preserving green space everywhere we can. No measure is too insignificant. Even something as small as leaving up a decade-old tree line between properties can benefit the community and the wildlife in and around it. That's something that maybe could tie into those property buyouts, something that a new landowner might clear out to build something. Just obviously older trees, older vegetation is better, but even a 10-year-old tree has a healthier root system and better groundwater absorption and erosion protection than a 0-year-old tree that is an acorn in a paved parking lot. So there's many ways to make a difference, both as a community and on a small individual scale. And yeah, thank you guys for listening to this. Here's my contact info if anyone wants to reach out to me. And if anyone has any questions or comments or a chance for discussion, now would be the time. All right, it looks like we're good on that end. Um, here's my sources. I'm not gonna stay on this page, but here is this page, so you can access that later if you'd like.
I was just going to note that I included the link for the nature-based solutions because I don't think people could probably click on it here. Obviously, you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
send out and
Yeah,
follow
that
up.
helps. Thank you for doing that. I think that pretty much concludes it, unless anyone has anything they'd like to ask or bring up.
Right. Yeah, thanks everyone. And there's a question looks like right now on will we be sending out the slides? I think Keegan mentioned she would.
Yes.
So everybody that attended, we have registration, so we'll send out the slides as a follow-up.
And I'll double check for you, Trisha, and make sure that that bioswale and rain garden resource is attached. If I still have it, I'll make sure that you can get access to that. And if not, I'll see if I can dig up some other resources to send you. All right, I think we're finished. You want to stop the recording, Joanna?